in sort of the condensed form, how did you
Sure.
go from wrestling fan to working in the business and your first time meeting Jim Cornette?
Sure. So I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, which Greensboro may be familiar to some folks. It was one of the great wrestling cities of the 70s, along with, St. Louis and some others. I grew up watching Mid Atlantic. First thing I ever saw on TV, I'm 8 years old, and I'm flipping channels. I see this big blonde guy beating up this other guy, rubbing his face in the mat. People are screaming. I have no idea what this is. I've never seen wrestling. Uh, and then it comes back from a shot, and it's the same blonde guy, but now he's dressed up. It was Ric Flair mauling Ricky Steamboat in the studio in '78, but it was actually the show a couple weeks later. That was the VTR footage that I walked in on, and then they come back, and there's Flair crowing with his two women. Steamboat comes out, grabs them, slaps them around, throws them in the ring, bumps them all over, and strips them down to his tidy whities. That was my intro to wrestling. And when Steamboat comes over and says, "We're not even," I'm hooked. I'm like, I don't know what this is. It's great. So I grew up watching it. I read the after magazines. I kind of learned who everybody was. Then when we got cable, we started getting Atlanta TV. We started getting WWE and World Class out of Dallas. Became a huge fan. Really kind of got knowledgeable. Read Fall Guys and Whatever Happened to Curious George. Just really was fascinated by the business and how it worked. I just couldn't. I was just mystified by the intricacies of how that works, how it all works. And then a couple years later, I'm a teenager. I'm in a comic book store downtown. Hear a couple guys talking about wrestling. I'd never heard anybody talk wrestling. Nobody I knew liked wrestling. Turned out this is John Hitchcock, and he and several of his buddies used to go to the Greensboro Coliseum for all the NWA shows, and would always get front row in this one section. I got chit chatting with him, and that's how I met John Hitchcock and Bruce Mitchell, who later wrote for the Torch for many years. Um, they took me in. I was 16. These guys were about 10 years older than I was, but we just started going to the matches all through the great 86 to 89 run of the NWA with Midnights and the Horsemen, and everything was good. Um, we got word one day that Jimmy Cornette was in the hospital, and we were like, "Oh my gosh, what happened? Did he have knowing him? Did he have a heart attack? Did he have a stroke?" It turned out because Jimmy would, without even exaggerating, would ingest and drink 6 to 12 Pepsis a day. His system just shut down, went haywire, and it shut down. So we would go to Greensboro Coliseum, and we'd always make signs and funny signs. We always cheered the heels. We love the heels. So at the time, the popular Pepsi commercial was the choice of the Pepsi generation. It was Michael Jackson, the choice of Pepsi generation. Whatever the top movie star was, the choice of the Pepsi generation. So we make this sign that says Jim Cornette, choice of the Pepsi generation. We show it to him as he's walking in the building. He sees it, he pops, he loves it. He comes over and he says, "Hi." And I have one rare visual aid that this was my first meeting of Cornette, and the only picture you'll ever see of myself with Jim Cornette and Bruce Mitchell. And this is our sign that we made.
He's got
All
the
right, so
Batman
we
shirt
met.
on as well.
There you go. So we met him in '89, and then he starts Smoky Mountain in '91. Jimmy kind of recognized us from the front row, was very good to us because we always cheered for him. The first Clash of the Champions, Wrestle War '90, we were always there cheering. So he starts Smoky Mountain in '91. It's actually 30 years ago, just last week, that they did the pilot tapings. He starts that in Tennessee, and so they start airing that in April of '92. I've taken a year off from college at this point, and then I see he's up in near the mountains, North Carolina. So I told my parents, I said, "I want to go back to college." "Yeah, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go to school up in the mountains." Purely wanted to be able to go to Smoky Mountain shows. So moved up towards the area. I moved up to a town called Boone, which is about halfway between myself or Greensboro and Knoxville. Started attending his shows that summer and got a feel for the product. Then I get a call that fall. John Hitchcock calls me from Greensboro and says, "Hey, Jimmy Cornette's coming to Greensboro. He has a meeting with some TV stations trying to get Smoky Mountain on. But he's also going to come by." John owned that comic book store. John said, "Jimmy's also going to bring his comic book collection by to have it appraised." And he said, "I told him there's a Clash of Champions that night while he's in town. Some of the guys in the front row would like to, or would come over to watch it. Would he like to?" I invited him over. Jimmy's coming over to watch the Clash with the guys. You got to come back home. So Boone was about a 2-hour drive. I came home that night. All my front row guys, like we used to, we'd always watch the Clash of Champions specials at somebody's house. But this time we have Jimmy Cornette there. Like, how great it, like sitting in John Hitchcock's living room. And it just so happened that Jimmy and I wound up on this little love seat together. And Madonna had just released, Madonna, famous singer, 1990, fall of 92, had just released this very racy, scanty book called Sex, kind of a coffee table picture book. So John has it on his coffee table. Jimmy picks it up. We start flipping through it. And we're like two 13-year-old boys just giggling and making all in our own captions and instantly hit it off. I mean, this guy and I have the same sense of humor, incredible smartasses, a little bit dark. And we just laughed looking at this book through the whole show. We never even watched the Clash of Champions. It was some horrible thing with Rick Steiner and Bill Kazmaier, one of those awful shows, WCW shows. So at the end of the night, Jimmy says, hey, here's my number. You know, I told him, I said, hey, I've just moved up to Boone. I was at your last show. These are, you know, I'm really enjoying it. At the end of the night, he says, well, here's my phone number. If you want tickets to Johnson City next week, give me a call. I'll leave them at the call window for you. He said, if you ever need tickets, call me. And that's how it started. And I did call him for Johnson City tickets. But I also, because I was in the area, if you look at the map, it's interesting the way they don't line up perfectly square, but there are 4 states that kind of all come together: North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. And so by living in one corner, you could hit shows in all 4 corners pretty easily. And so I would go to all the shows I could. I would only call them for tickets for Johnson City because that was a big venue and I wanted to make sure I got good seats. But that's how that started. And then I just kept pushing. I wanted to, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to be part of it. Like, I mean, they had Bob Caudle. Bob Caudle was my announcer. That was the first man I ever heard call a match. You know, that episode with Flair and Steamboat. Like, I grew up with Bob Caudle and Dutch and all these guys. And like, I wanted to be part of this small territory. I didn't know where I'd fit in. I didn't think I'd be some great wrestler. I didn't think I was going to be a manager or a commentator or even a referee. I didn't know, but because I didn't know how all the behind the scenes stuff really worked. And so I just kept going to the shows, and then Jimmy would see me and wave, and then Jimmy would see me and wave me over, and he'd go, hey, can you run a message over to the other locker room for me? Can you go tell Tammy that blah, blah, blah? Sure. And it just started. And I got to meet Brian Hildebrand, who was very welcoming and encouraging. He knew what it was like to want in so bad. So if we were at a show way up in Kentucky and he knew I had a 5-hour drive back to Boone in North Carolina, he'd say, why don't you just stay with me and get up in the morning and drive back? So I did a lot of couch surfing on his thing until finally, when my lease was up in Boone, I just said, I'm not going back. I'm just going to stay over here and make it work. If Jimmy doesn't have a job for me, and he didn't, I'll go work, you know, at Burger King until something opens up. I'll do something. And so I just made myself available. And I just, I didn't act like a goof, and I just didn't act like I was overly smart to the business. I tried to be real respectful. And I said, Jimmy just kept giving me odd jobs until there was something on the payroll that he was willing to do.
Yeah. With Smoky Mountain, what was the initial infrastructure as far as staff? And Brian Hildebrand was obviously, you know, the jack of all trades, and
Right.
the man who the straw that stirred the drink, I believe, is a saying.
Yeah.
But who else was there? And we'll get to Brian as well. But who else was there who was
sure?
Yeah.
So the original trio was Jimmy, and Jimmy was going to book the talent, write the creative, and book. You know, he was the booker. And then Sandy Scott was going to be the promoter. Sandy, the towns would call Sandy and say, we want you to come in. What date do you have? And then Sandy would line up to schedule the building and a promoter, someone to do the promotion. And then Tim Horner was going to do, Tim Horner was also there. Tim Horner was going to do merchandise and the training school. And so that was the original trio, how it started. And I think Brian came in on like the second or third TV taping. He wasn't there from day one, but he was almost from day one. And so and then they hired Pam Lawson to work in the office, and she was going to do ad sales for us, which never really caught on a whole lot of me. But anyway, so that was it. And then they brought me in, and then Jimmy started giving me the jobs of, okay, I'll deliver all the marketing materials. In addition, I would do live announcing at the live events. If we didn't have another announcer there, I would do it. Um, and then just the general gopher stuff is what I was doing to start.
Yeah.
And then of course Rick Rubin, the backer, but we only saw him once in 2 years. So.
Well, since you mentioned Rick Rubin, you also
Mm-hmm.
wrote that payment plans and everything of that ilk, and you said you only met Rick Rubin once. When was it obvious that Rick Rubin was actually bankrolling this promotion in the first place?
It was not. Jimmy kept his financial backer out of the newsletters for quite a while. I bet for the first year and a half. And then I don't even know how it got out or how much it got out, but we kind of knew in-house. In the office, we kind of knew. And so he shows up one night in Barberville. Well, if you've seen Rick Rubin, Rick Rubin, crazy hair, big beard, he blended right. Nobody up there in the sticks of Kentucky, right? He just blended right in, to the point someone had to tell me, "Hey, there's Rick Rubin," one of the boys. I was like, "Oh, that's okay, all right." So, but yeah, it was the only one time I ever met him. But I have 2 tax returns from Rick Rubin for 2 years, and I hold on to those. Those are that's some other Smoky Mountain memorabilia that not too many people have, or tax returns from Rick Rubin.
Yeah. Did you ever become aware that Rick Rubin was funneling ideas or something he wanted to see on TV? Because the most famous story is he loved the wrestling Mummy, and then Prince Karras turned up. But were there any other creative ideas that you knew was coming from Rick Rubin?
No. I knew there were certain things he wanted to see. He would tell Jimmy that, but no, that was the Mummy was the primary. I think that was the one he really. Now, when he didn't like something, he made it clear. I know one time Jimmy aired an episode of Tim Horner singing for like 20 minutes. And here's Rick Rubin working with Tom Petty and Johnny Cash. He turns on his TV show and he sees Tim Horner wailing, Thunder Road, an old Garth Brooks song. And Rick just said, "Nope, that's got to go. That's out. That's done." But other than that, no, I don't. I think he kind of let Corny. He knew he'd hired a great guy to do that. So
with Smoky Mountain, we can't go and talk about Smoky Mountain without the Smoky Mountain Flophouse. Did you actually stay there? Or
so I am the original proprietor, and so here's how the smokehouse came to be. So that spring of '93, I'm not officially on the payroll. I'm hanging out early winter of '93. I'm hanging out on Brian's couch some, and still living in my college apartment, down the road. Jimmy Del Rey comes in the spring of '93. They had done a loser leaves the fall match between the Rock and Roll Express, the original Heavenly Bodies of Dr. Tom and Stan Lane. Stan wanted to retire. He's out. Jimmy comes in. Jimmy lived down in Tampa. When Jimmy would come up for a 3 or 4 day weekend, he would stay with Brian Hildebrand. Brian Hildebrand had a 2-bedroom apartment. So Jimmy's in one room, Brian's in another. I'm on the couch every now and then. Then Brian met Pam, who would later become his wife. And then he started getting kind of serious, and Pam was around a lot. And then Jimmy says to me, "Hey, this is getting too tight. Let's get out of here. Let's go get our own place. Let them have this one." Okay, sure. Because Brian lived in the 2-bedroom duplex. He was upstairs. Downstairs were Tim Horner's 2 trainees, Anthony Michaels and Brian Keys, who wrestled on our TV a lot as underneath guys. So Jimmy says, "Find a place. I'll be back next week." So I find this little 3-bedroom townhouse, and it's perfect. It's right between Brian and Jim Cornette. We're all within about a mile of each other because we always rode together, so it's important to be close together. Jimmy comes back. Del Rey comes back. He's like, "It's perfect." So Jimmy Del Rey and my name was on the lease. I was the one who rented it, and we moved in there in that. Gosh, it was right. He'd only been in the area for maybe a month, so it was probably about May of '93. And then Jimmy and I lived there together until he lost the loser of the fall a year later in April at the Bluegrass Brawl in Pikeville. So for the first year, the Flophouse was really just a nice little apartment where Jimmy Del Rey and I lived together. It's just the 2 of us. Jimmy was my big brother, my great guy. He left, and just before he left, the downstairs apartment under Brian Hildebrand with the Infernos with Anthony and Brian flooded. Anthony said, "Hey, can I take one?" Because I had a 3-bedroom place. Jimmy had a bedroom. I had a bedroom. The 3rd bedroom was the office where I worked, where I did all the office stuff. We let Anthony move in. Del Rey moved out, and I was like, gosh, it'd be nice to have another third person in here to get that rent. Had I known Bruiser Bedlam was coming in, I would have saved it for him. However, I didn't know. Jimmy says, hey, I got these kids coming in from Canada. One of them named Chris needs a room. Do you have a room? Can he rent with you? I was like, yeah, sure. So I took in Jericho. And unfortunately, like I said, Bruiser showed up a month later and needed a place. I'd have much rather had Bruiser there than Jericho, but we did. We eventually wound up at. So the flop house didn't become the flop house until I left. Then they started taking in Boo and D'Lo. Now, a lot of guys would stay there like I did with Hildebrand. For instance, Mustafa Saeed of the Gangsters. Well, they lived way down in Atlanta, which is 4 hours. If we'd been up in northern Kentucky, I was about halfway for them. So I'd say, hey, if you want to crash on the couch, you're too tired to drive. I let guys do that occasionally. But no, the first year, the flop house was actually just a nice townhouse in the rolling hills of East Tennessee that Jimmy and I shared. And it was a great year. But after I left, it became quite the dive.
Menagerie.
When they let in Boo, and because I saw Boo, and that's when I was like, I just met this gal, this cute little redhead. I think I'm going to go stay with her for a while, but I still had my name was on the lease for about 3 more months. So I wanted to stay nearby, but I didn't want to stay there anymore. I just was like, so.
Who was, well, you mentioned Boo, obviously, but who, in fact, I'll ask you 2 questions. Who was the worst person to ever stay at the house as far as you just don't want them renting your property? And secondly, who was, how many people were there at one time at most?
So it had to be Boo, just because John was just a gross guy. But like I said, that when the first year was just Jimmy and I, occasionally, like I said, a Bobby Blaze might say, hey, I can't make it all the way back, can I stay tonight? Sure. But the original roommates were, yes, myself and Del Rey, and then add Anthony Michaels, who became a little snot Dudley in ECW. He's one of the first Dudleys, but his career didn't take off. He didn't make it, which is a shame. He's a good guy. We're still in touch today. Rex King of Well Done. Rex would also stay. He sometimes stayed with Candido in Knoxville, which is about 45 minutes down the road, and then sometimes Rex stayed with us. Bruiser, Y2J.
I think Mick Foley stayed there for a brief period, didn't he? In downtown Bruno, maybe?
No. If Mick stayed with anybody, he stayed with Brian. They were very close. They were very, very close. They may have had a similar flop house in Memphis.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that was about it. It was never overcrowded. But I heard after I left, because I stayed in touch with Anthony Michaels, Jericho left, and then Boo moved in, then Saeed stayed, and I think I might have even sent you a picture on Twitter, all the roommates out in front of my house when the place later burned down. It was Boo and Saeed and those guys, and D'Lo. D'Lo was great. D'Lo was a good guy. Yeah, Balls was disgusting. He was just a gross person.